Who's that? Well, that's that Bucher guy.
What did he say?
No, it's Bucher.
Bucher!
Hey, musky hunters, I'm at the Musky Shop, the best place in the world to buy musky gear, and we're going to give you some more inside scoop on techniques. And this week we're going to talk about Brutus, the boulder beast, and cranking boulders, cranking mid-lake boulders for big muskies, and how I do it, and how I outfit my rod, reel, tackle, and everything. So here we go. As far as when you're working big crankbaits like this, when you get into this size class of crankbaits, you do these 9, 10, 11-inch class crankbaits. They're pretty heavy baits, and they also have a lot of drag to them. So when you use a bait like this, of course, you need stout tackle. I'm using 80-pound beast braid. As far as rods go, the entire class of St. Croix rods in the 86 heavy fast is what you want to focus in on a rod like this. Stay away from your medium heavy with these larger crankbaits, because they just have too much drag, too much bend when you're working the bait, especially when you go into the figure 8 with this bait. So I tend to really rely on the 86 heavy fast, and more than the 9 even. I really like this rod because I'm about to explain here is this hybrid cranking jerkbait technique that has been so effective for me. And as far as a reel goes, I'm a big fan of anything in that 5 to 6 to 1 gear ratio class. I don't use stuff that's much faster than that. Don't use stuff that's much slower than that for this style of fishing. I want enough speed on this, so if I want to, engage speed and create speed, it's easy to do. At the same time, these real low geared reels, yes, they're easier to retrieve, but they really move the bait almost too slow. So that style of reel, this is a Daiwa Alexa 400 class reel, and like I said, anything in that 5 to 6 to 1 gear ratio range, no matter what reel you use, that's what you want. And 80-pound braid with these bigger crankbaits is essential. Now, one last thing on the wire leader side, what you always want to do with these big crankbaits, no matter what you like, if you like fluorocarbon, if you like wire, you can see I'm wired up here. This is basically almost identical to the setup that I just caught Brutus and the Boulder Beast on there. It's a cool name, isn't it? A friend of mine came up with that. But wire leader wise, always use a wire leader that's at least as long as the lure. And like we talked just recently on a Musky Shop segment about damage control, you see where I've got my lure connected right to the handle, not connected to this guide here, because when you have these sharp hooks, you hook it here, you're gonna potentially damage your line. So I will always hook mine on the handle like this, okay, when I'm traveling. But what I wanted to show you here is leader length. So watch when I fold this bait. See, when I just folded that bait for on a figure 8, or when you're jerk bait fishing and you're getting a lateral movement on your bait, what you want is a leader that completely protects your lure. If that leader's too short, you will expose, especially a tail striking fish, you will expose it to a bite off. So that's the basics in the tackle setup, okay? From that point on, what you want to do with this bait, what I suggest you learn to do with this bait, what makes this bait superior, in my opinion, to like the traditional jerk bait, okay, is you can do both. You can work this like a jerk bait. So you can jerk and pause, get the bumping rising action. By the way, that's the floating diving style bait is essential for this style of fish, because you can be hitting boulders and then rising up out of the boulder, hitting a boulder and rising up out of it. And you're feeling your way through these boulder fields, these submerged boulder fields, by doing that. So that's the jerkbait technique. And the nice thing about the wobbling nature, the flashing, wobbling nature of a big crankbait like this is you also get vibration, and you get lateral back and forth movement. So when you pull your big minnow bait like this and then you let it rise, depending upon where that minnow bait is in the sway, when you let it rise, it's going to continue that motion. So when it's wiggling like this and then you stop, when you jerk it and it stops, so if it's over here, it's going to start rising that way. And if you leave a little slack in your line, which is another key to this technique, by the way, on the jerkbait side, is more slack, more lateral movement. Tighter line, you'll keep it, you'll keep the rise tighter. More slack and you'll get this. So those are key things. Now, totally switching gears about 50% of the way through the retrieve. I will totally change up from a jerkbait style retrieve and then go into a straight crankbait. Crank it straight and then get it into a more of a crankbait mode, straight to the boat, and finish with a figure eight. Now, that's different than the way a lot of guys fish this bait. They will jerkbait it all the way to the boat and then rely on some kind of a rise, twitch and rise, kind of a dead stick technique in order to trigger the fish. That works occasionally, but I would argue that you'll get a far larger percentage of these fish to strike the bait by switching up to a straight retrieve, and then you'll get the power in the technique of the figure eight to really work for you. In fact, when you watch me hook up with Brutus the Boulder Beast, you'll see that the fish struck on the retrieve, not on the jerkbait technique. He might have been following it, but it struck on once I started the straight retrieve. I catch a lot of these fish, by the way, a lot of these big fish with this technique in the figure eight as well.
Take her quick, right now.
Okay.
Okay. Wait, go. Joey, buddy, got a monster.
But I also catch plenty of them. I would say at least 1/3 of them while I'm bumping these boulders, okay? To wrap this all up, what's really neat about this technique also is get this, folks, because this is a really cool thing for you muskie hunters. And you only get this kind of stuff at the muskie shop. This technique gives you a side scanning sonar. So whether you own this sophisticated sonar equipment that's all available today, and if your budget allows for it, that's great. But even then, your sonar is only going to give you so much. It's wherever your boat is positioned, it's going to give you a reading about what's underneath you and alongside your boat. It's only going to give you so much of a reading. But with a crankbait, casting off the bow, you can feel out the crest and the spines and the boulders with the crankbait. So it serves a double purpose. One, it's your side scanning sonar telling you where the high spots are in the rock, on this rock field or rock hump or bar, whatever you're fishing. And of course, it's also catching you a fish, potentially catching a fish while it's being your side scanning sonar. So you got a double purpose weapon here. You got the side scanning sonar and you got a big fish weapon. And when you're banging those boulders, by the way, that's key. That's one of the key ways to trigger these fish and fire them up. When you're locating these offshore boulders, when you find the one that's upwind of the rest of it, watch my video. When you watch Brutus the Boulder Beast, you will see I actually call the strike within seconds of me saying that's where that fish should be. What I mean by that is I felt the last boulder in this whole boulder field, the high boulder that was closest to the deep water. When I hit that boulder, I said, this is where this fish should be, and boy, within moments that fish struck. So there you go, folks. Wrapping it up, you got a side scanning sonar, you got a big fish weapon, but don't just jerk it all the way to the boat, don't just crank it all the way to the boat. Jerkbait's a hybrid technique that I talked about for years, and you'll see it again and again and again on my TV episodes, on my YouTube episodes. It's jerk it about 50% of the way in, at least 1/3 of the way in. And as soon as you stop hitting boulders, weeds, whatever you're working, then turn it into a crankbait, because then it becomes deadly on the figure eight at both sides. How about that? The Musky Shop. Yes!